you would like to turn with me for our second reading. This is also from Exodus, and we are going to pick up where Evie left off before. So it's Exodus chapter 2, starting from verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. In chapter 3. And now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, he called out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, But I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Let's just spend a very quick moment in prayer. Gracious and loving Father, we thank you for your word this morning. Lord, there is so much in your word that we can take from it. So many things that we can take to heart. And so, Lord, I pray that it will be for us this morning, that as we see your word and we read your word, that you will speak to each one of us. In your loving name, amen. You know, and I guess you all will know of this, when we take on a significant job in life, that it's necessary for a time of preparation to achieve a good outcome. Ask any Year 12 student what they had to do to prepare for their final exams. And they will tell you of the many hours of study and preparation for that one moment of time. But today I want to have a look at Moses in Exodus and look at the preparation that he undertook to lead the people of Israel, God's chosen nation, out of Egypt and away from the cruel captivity that they experienced. And as we go through these two passages that we've had read this morning, I want to look at Moses, first of all, his upbringing, his education, the choices that he made, and God's call and commissioning on Moses' life, but also before that, the cry out of the people to God. So let's have a look at how Moses was prepared by God to lead God's people. And as we go, hopefully you can see that there is a connection in preparation for us to serve God as we live out our Christian life with him. At the beginning of chapter 2, we see the beginning of Moses' life, perhaps not too different to many of us. A godly home, born to parents of faith. Moses' parents were Amram and Jochebed, and in the first 10 verses that was read to us before, we see how they showed their faith in God. And when the king had ordered the murder of Israeli children, they put their trust in God. They put him in a basket and set him free, not sure of what the outcome would be, relying only on their faith in God. In Hebrews 11, it says, because of their faith, they were not afraid of the king's commands. You know, as children, as people of God, when our children are born, it's by faith that we bring them and we present them before God in this assembly. We seek his face, putting our trust in him to guard our children, to guard them as they grow up. But there will be different seasons for them. And so for Amram and Jochebed, the real test of their faith was when they put that basket on the waters of the Nile. They had no idea what the outcome was going to be. They had no idea that this moment was a change in the course of history for God's people. After all, this was the place where the Hebrew boys were being murdered by the king. But likewise, there will be times when we as parents will have no idea what to do for our children, what is the best. And in those moments, all we can do is to have faith and to trust God. And in a sense, we place that basket on the water, not knowing what the outcome will be, but having faith in him. Looking at Moses, we also know that Moses received a good education. As the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, he received a top-class education. But not only that, it's obvious that he was an intelligent young man. In Acts 7 we read, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. But no doubt that some of his education was tainted by the beliefs of the Egyptians. And I'm sure that whilst his real mother nursed him in those early months, which was another provision of God, that she would have continually spoken to him and sung songs of praise as she nursed him. But even as he grew up, no doubt there would have been contact at different times. Times when she would have been able to reassure him, to teach him a far more important education. An education of placing his trust in God. And you know, it's a reminder that whilst we give our children good education in our schools, there is no better education than the continual reminding our children to put their faith and their trust in a living God. A God who is able to exceed all our expectations. And so as we come down to verse 11 of chapter 2, we see that for Moses there are choices to be made. And at this point Moses has grown up. But we can see, and we're about to see, that his education was nothing to the education that he was about to receive. His education now was to come in the form of suffering and sacrifice, and to walk with an all-knowing and an all-powerful wise God. He was about to be educated in the things of life that really matter. In verse 11, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and he looked on their burdens. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew one of his people. He looked this way and he looked that way. And seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" And he answered, "Who made you prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill us as you killed the Egyptian?" And Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." You know, as we read these sort of passages, it's a good idea at times to also, where we can, is to pick up passages from other parts of the Bible, which include the New Testament, to get a complete picture of what's going on. In Hebrews 11, verse 24, it says this: "By faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. And by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible." You know, the choice that Moses was making would not have been an easy one. After all, he had everything that his heart desired. Egypt at that time was extremely wealthy. He could have had whatever he wanted. And I believe that the struggles in his heart were more about the kingdom of this world compared to the kingdom of another world, a kingdom to come. And there are choices that we must struggle with. Will I choose the pleasures of this world, or will I wait expectantly with a joyful heart for the world to come, being prepared to do without what this world calls pleasure? Moses knew that it was wrong to go after the things of the Egyptian world. He was an intelligent man. He would have seen the abuse of his own people, and in killing the Egyptian, he thought that he was on God's errand. But Moses at this point was trusting in his own strength, not by faith. When he killed the Egyptian, as we read before, he looked this way and he looked that way before killing him. But if he was going by faith at that time, God would have given him the right response. Yes, he was passionate for his people, but that moment of passion set back their release by 40 years. Moses at this time was 40 years old. It was going to be another 40 years before God would bring him back. It's important to understand at this moment in time that the Hebrews weren't ready for God to free them either. They had already displayed their arrogance by refusing to worship God. Instead, they chose idols. But because of that disobedience, they had been sent as prisoners into Egypt for a period of 400 years. And that time wasn't up yet. They still needed to continue through the humbling experience of captivity. But whilst in captivity, God was still honouring his promises to Abraham to make them a great nation. They were still multiplying in number. And it seems to be that they multiplied more in captivity than at any other time. And as the Hebrews weren't ready, neither was Moses ready to serve or to lead. And as we have just seen, Moses was acting on passion, even if he thought he was acting on Moses' behalf and out of compassion for his own people. But Moses had a lot more to learn about taking care of a people, a nation of people. God was going to send Moses to Midian. It was going to be a valuable time for him, a time of isolation where he would learn some valuable lessons in humility. In verse 15, And as we look at his time in Midian, a time that will be a time of isolation. Verse 15, it says, when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. There is still much for Moses to learn. So God took Moses to Midian. A time to learn. A time in isolation, away from the pomp and the riches and the distraction of Egypt. You know, whenever we reach that point of decision making in our spiritual walk, there are times when we need to get away from the hustle and the bustle. Times to be alone with God and to search him out. That it was important for him to be sent to the Midianites because they were of the line of Abraham and still worshipped the one true God. In that place he would find a comfortable place to live in safety, surrounded by like-minded people. The reason we come here every Sunday, to be surrounded by like-minded people. For Moses, it was a time to learn. It was a time to learn the humble task of being a shepherd. And so for him, gone are the baths and the good food, but instead now he was herding sheep, beginning to smell like them. The purpose was to prepare Moses to be able to shepherd God's people. He would learn to care, to be gentle. He would protect them and keep them from danger, building a trusting relationship, learning to be selfless and to persevere, learning how to protect them from the constant dangers. It's also through this country that Moses would lead the nation of Israel, and so now he would become acquainted with the lay of the land. And as he entered the land, he came across a well where he sat down and he rested. But no doubt it was a time for him to stop and to reflect on what has just happened. It was a major upheaval in his life. He'd just killed another man. So many thoughts racing through his mind. And now the Pharaoh was after him, wanted to kill him. And so what was to become of him? You can imagine those thoughts racing through his head as he sat by the well. But not only was this a place of learning and reflection, it would also be a place to provide him a safe hiding place. And as was read earlier from verse 16, we discovered that no sooner had he sat down, he found himself running to the rescue of some local women who were being harassed by other local shepherds. And at this time they were tending to their father's flock. And these women are the daughters of Reuel, also known as Jethro, the priest of Midian. And as a result of that encounter, Moses not only found a safe haven, he also found a wife, a new home, a new family. It is this new life where Moses now learnt the difference between living in luxury and pleasure and now knowing hardship and poverty, a simple family life, the life of a shepherd, which wasn't easy. And so this was to be another important lesson of humility for him. A necessary step before being placed in a role of leadership. You know, it's a must for any person who takes on the role of a pastor or elder or any other position involved in serving or leading. We need to learn how to be humble. But it's not something that's taught in a book. So often it will come through the hard knocks of life. Understanding that no one else is superior, that we are not superior to anyone else, it's a good starting point. But little else will bring us down a few pegs than to know hardship and hard testing. As hard as that is, a person who is humble as they play their part in shepherding the flock of Christ, is more able to understand their trials of life and the trials of life that others go through. Egypt had educated Moses in the best education that man could offer. It also taught him how to live and to work in the court of Pharaoh, how to be an effective soldier. But now he was to see a new direction in his life, a direction that can only come through the hand of God, a time of communing with God, having time alone with him. And that will do any of us more good than any of the activities that we find ourselves taking up in this life. And so now as we come to verse 22 and we hear the people crying out to God. And during those many days the king of Egypt died and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out to him. The cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. You know, finally they had reached the point where they had had enough of the slavery and the persecution. So much so that they now found it necessary to cry out to God. They found themselves in bondage because they first of all abandoned God and his desires for them. Instead, they chose to worship idols. And you have to ask the question, how dumb is that? They left a living, holy God to worship idols that were lifeless, unable to see, unable to feel, unable to know anything, dead, worthless idols. And so now they are reaching the point where they have now been in captivity for 400 years. Ezekiel 20 verse 8 tells us, "But they rebelled against me and were not willing to listen to me. None of them cast away the detestable things their eyes feasted on, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. And then I said I would pour out my wrath upon them and spend my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt." But now finally, they are getting the message. Finally, they call out to God in desperation. And how often do we find ourselves struggling on our own before we let go? We let go of our own strength and our own ability, recognizing that we are weak. We can't do it alone. And so in desperation, finally, we too call out to God. But notice in verse 25, God saw the people of Israel. God knew. God wasn't sitting back relaxing. He wasn't that busy that he couldn't see them. He saw them. He knew. He knew what they were going through. He knew their anguish, their heartache, their pain. You know, I know that in recent days, for some of you, recent days, recent weeks, recent months, some of you have been through a tough time. No doubt feeling battered and bruised, heartbroken. But take notice of that verse again. God sees you. God knows what's going on. It's not just losing someone we love that can leave us feeling this way. Watching someone we love tearing their lives apart, ignoring God, when they so desperately need him. Watching those we love refusing to accept Jesus Christ. There can be a number of reasons for us to be feeling this way. Loss of income, loss of a job, living in a home that has pressed the self-destruct button. But for each one of us, The message is the same. God sees you. He knows what's happening in your life. And he wants you to cry out to him. God considers it worthy. It's a worthy thing for him to come and to meet us in our needs. As he did for the Israelites, God will show us. His eyes are fixed on us. That's what he wants us to see. His eyes are fixed on us. He's going to show us his strength, his power, and that he is working on our behalf. And so as we look at the next phase of Moses' preparation, we turn to chapter 3 and we begin to see God's calling on his life. In chapter 3 verse 1, now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And in this passage, we need to notice, or we see that there is a mention of the angel of the Lord appearing to Moses. What is the angel of the Lord? Now, we don't really have time to go into that. And certainly I don't believe I could do that justice. But simply put, my understanding is that through this angel of the Lord, Yahweh, the Lord God, is fully present. And the next thing to notice is that the bush was burning and yet it was not consumed. Something important to be reminded of here is that God uses the weak and the despised things of this world to bring about his purposes. You might be forgiven for thinking that if God was going to appear in a burning bush, it wouldn't be a thorny, dried up old bush, but perhaps rather a great blaze from a large cypress tree, or something like that. No, he chose to use the humble things. Likewise, God was about to do great things using Moses, someone who has been rejected by his own people, someone who by his own admission can't speak with authority. He's no longer the son of Pharaoh's daughter, but now a shepherd, someone who is despised, someone who's considered a lowlife. But notice in verse 2, the bush was burning but wasn't consumed. And that means that there was no other source of fuel. It was self-sustaining. And a self-sustaining flame can't be put out. It's an important symbol of God. Self-sustaining, ever-present. Someone who doesn't know any other source of life. The next few verses that we have read speak of the conditions for Moses to be able to approach God. Don't get too close. Take your sandals off. You are standing on holy ground. There can be no contamination of the world in the presence of God. It was an example of coming into the presence of God in true humility and submission. An important thing to remember as we come into his presence, to come into the presence of a living, holy God, ever-present God, coming before him in true humility and submission, leaving the contamination of the world outside. And what a difference that can make to our worship of him. And those who want to come and search out God with all their heart will find him. Ecclesiastes has an important reminder of the needed humility and reverence. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. In other words, don't be arrogant. Don't be foolish in our speech. Say little and listen to every word that comes from God. And so, having gotten Moses' attention, God now says to him, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. You know, often you hear the phrase, I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. But now he has said, I am the God of your father. His father was Amram, no standout, no one of any significance. Wasn't anyone like Abraham or Isaac or Jacob. But now God is identifying as the God also of Moses. And in Matthew chapter 2, verse 32, it says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. This verse shows the continued relationship between God and his people. And in that relationship, the blessings of God are passed down through the generations. It shows the importance of faith and trust in God. And Jesus tells us in this verse that God is the God of the living, not the dead. That means that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are not dead. They still live in eternity. God is still their God. He is also the God of Moses and Amram and us. And we, who are believers in him, will live in eternity, and he will always be our God. And so as we come close to the end of this message, we come to God's commissioning of Moses. It's important to note that when we see the same thing being said more than once, that we can be sure that it's critically important. We read before verse 24 of chapter 2, where it said God heard their groaning. He remembered his covenant, he saw the people, and he knew. And so now a reminder for Moses in verse 7. And then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. But this repetition is not just for Moses. He is now telling Moses, but it is also for the reader, for you and for me. Another reminder of God's faithfulness, another reminder of God's love for those who call him Lord. I see you, I hear you, I know you, I love you. A reminder not to give up on raising our petitions to the heavens, to an all-knowing, all-seeing, all-hearing, all-merciful, all-loving God. And in verse 8 we read, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land, to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And so here we see that God is set to deliver his people. Matthew Henry says, when God does something very extraordinary, he is said to come down to do it. In the beginning of verse 8, he said, I have come down to deliver. Jesus came down to set us free from the cross, through the cross. In verse 9, and now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Another reminder that God has heard the cry of his people and he has seen their oppression. Something we need to really grab a hold of, that God sees us, he knows us. And then in verse 10, God commissions Moses to go. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. You know, I wonder that if Moses had been asked to lead the Israelites out when he was living in the palace, what would have been his response at that time? And his response now, I think, is an understandable one, because now he has been humbled. The cockiness has gone. Now a true sense of humility. And God said to him, I will be with you. He knows that is what he needs. That's what Moses knows, that that's what he needs. A total dependence on God. And so Moses is now prepared to go to serve God and to lead his people. He's experienced a lot. 80 years from his birth till now. And now going out on God's mission. From being brought up in the courts of Pharaoh to learning new skills as a shepherd in a desert land. It's there that he heard God call. And he has been made ready to serve and to lead. Out of a godly home, he received divine education. He has now learnt to make wise, godly choices. And in his time of isolation, he has now become humble and dependent on God. And so he was called by God. He was equipped and he was sent, ready to serve and to lead God's people out of Egypt. Moses has proven that God can and use anyone for his purposes. So I would ask you this morning, is God asking you to serve him? Perhaps in some way here in this church. Perhaps taking up some form of ministry. Maybe he has plans for you overseas. Whatever the case, if God has been talking to you over time, don't delay. Place yourself into his care, because he will teach you. If you are willing, he will teach you whatever you need to know. You are in his presence right now, so talk to him. Ask him, what is it? What is it that you want me to do? And he gives you a promise, as he did to Moses. He gives me that same promise. He said, I will be with you. So may God bless this time to us. May we learn from the things of Moses. And may God bless us as we seek to serve him.